Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me, Lloyd Auerbach. It's good to see so many folks here at the very, very start. First thing I want to just mention, I thought, is something if you have not noticed some things on my website or on my social media, I do want to mention that starting tomorrow is the Metaphysical Frontier Summit. That is a daily presentation of multiple interviews with people in the consciousness, psychic, paranormal fields, parapsychology fields that will be available for free. The summit is actually free. It's online. There'll be several lectures every single day. I'm one of them. I'm not sure which day I'm scheduled for yet, but if you go to lloydauerbach.com/events, or just go to the events page on my new website, you will see a link to register. Again, it is free, completely free. They also have, once you register, you get something about their Facebook group, because they have a discussion group where folks will be able to ask and have questions passed along to the various speakers. It goes for 10 days. So it's not just tomorrow. So if you don't register tomorrow, you'll register the next day. So again, it's a really good opportunity to hear a variety of really nice people, people in various fields actually speaking about this. And it's just, again, it's the metaphysical. In fact, I'll see about putting a link in here right now. I'll give you the registration link that tells them that you have, let's see, this is the main registration link, actually. So you can just go ahead and use this. There it is. So definitely check it out, even if you don't have a chance to sit and watch things. Because things are pre-recorded, they're not live per se, you should be able to watch them throughout the day at your leisure, and possibly the evening. They will, from what I understand, they will be packaging everything into something you can buy later on. So take the opportunity to do it for free right now, if you can. One of the folks to really pay attention to, because I know people often have an interest in remote viewing, is Angela Ford. She has also been interviewed. She'll be a speaker at the conference too, the Frontier Conference. And Angela you don't hear her name very often, but she was one of the main and most accurate remote viewers for the Stargate program. And she was not Army. She was actually an administrator in the program. So she's done a lot of really great stuff. She's worked with law enforcement. And I think you'll find her really very, very interesting. But there's quite a number of other speakers. When you go to the site and take a look and see who's on the picture front, you'll see a lot of people that are there, and has a lot of good information there as well. Helene Wabe, who is the Director of Research at the Institute for Noetic Sciences, will be speaking. She's also past president of the Parapsychological Association. So not necessarily every lecture or every presentation will be for you, but there's going to be a wide range of people, and the folks putting it on have done, I think, a really, really good job. So every one of the speakers was asked also to provide some stuff for free. So there will be some downloads. There'll be a link in my presentation of downloads you can get, although I think I've offered them to folks on this podcast before. But there's a few things there you can actually download. So keep an eye out for the ebooks and downloadable documents and audio and things like that. Again, we're all giving those for free as we go along. Okay, well, good to see everybody here. Got a good group for right now. A lot of familiar names and a few folks I haven't seen in a while. I'll start out by asking, before I start promoting some other stuff, or I have one question that was given to me by someone in outside of Edinburgh, so in Scotland. And I'm going to get to that question in a bit, but in the meantime, let's see if anybody has anything they would like me to address tonight right off the bat. So I'll just give it a moment. I'm going to put my website just so you can know exactly what it is. Again, it's just my name. This should be pretty easy for you to copy my name from what you're seeing on the screen right now. And there's a lot of stuff. I'll be adding actually more material to it over the next month or couple months as well. So I don't see any questions yet or any topics to talk about. So first things first then. Soul phone opinions. Okay, that's good. I know a bit about the Soul Phone project. I know where it actually originated, the idea itself originated. It actually started out, it's coming from some technology, some idea that Dr. Julian Isaacs had about psychokinesis, about folks who have been able to interrupt photoelectric beams. So you think about the security beams that you see on heist movies with all the lasers going back and forth. You know, you can see that they have to kind of do acrobatics around the laser. So each end of that would be a photoelectric cell. And if someone walks through that, it breaks the beam, sets off an alarm, or is registered. So there have been times that folks have been able to break the beam from several feet or even further away, from several yards away. So that idea, Julian thought was a really interesting idea for an experimental setup for psychokinesis. And Gary Schwartz thought that that might be really interesting if spirits can affect things. Maybe they could actually break the beam in certain ways, almost in a coded method as well. So that the soul phone, the idea of that initially, and I'm not sure where they are with it right now, was to set up something that if there are spirits present, they can actually break the beam almost like in a Morse code fashion, eventually getting to something that perhaps they can do it with letters and numbers. I'm not sure how they're even going to do that. But the question is whether there were actually spirits present or not. And the other thing we have to kind of make sure of is that the living people don't want to expect those beams to be broken so much that their unconscious minds affects the beams rather than spirits being present. So probably help to have a medium present to bring somebody in at that point. Okay, Liz asked me about, I have not listened to the telepathy tapes. I didn't even know about them until a couple of weeks ago. Maybe I'm trying to remember who asked me. Maybe Paul, you may have asked me about them last month. I do know the work of Diane Hennessy Powell. You know, I know that there's been a lot of controversy about them, but I think it's important that, especially the most negative report about it comes from someone in the Skeptical Inquirer magazine online. And I know that Diane Powell and my colleague Brian Williams wrote a really good rebuttal pointing out effectively how many inaccuracies there were. You know, there with the work that Powell has done, clearly there may be some sessions that need to be removed from the data, because that's going to happen in some respects. Might not have been better as well controlled as other sessions, and really focus on the well controlled sessions. But I know from hearing Diane talk about this work years ago that it's really interesting and exciting, and it really is especially interesting because we know the people who are autistic, they don't experience the world the same way that the rest of us do. Their perceptions are affected, and sorry about that jostling of the computer there. So she's done some really interesting work, and I think it's really worth taking a closer look at her work as well. So that's a really good thing. Liz, yes, you could try it with your garage door opener safety thing, you know. There is that beam that prevents the garage door from closing properly. I haven't even thought about that. That would be really an interesting way to play around with PK, although I don't think you want to break your garage door. But yeah, that is a photoelectric beam that's there. And I see, Liz, you're saying, you know, the telepathy tape, she's using it to finance lab time. Yeah, and you know, the problem with parapsychology has been for years lack of funding. And we have some great ideas in the field, some that are kind of more traditional, others that are more interesting, like what Diane's doing. And finding funding for a way to get the information out to the public is always important. So that really is very, very important. All right, Lucas, you ever had any surprisingly impressive experiences with remote viewing? Not me personally, other than watching people do it. Certainly in working on the book ESP Wars East and West, I got an insight, and even before that, I got an insight into so much of the material and some of the missions, the tasking that have been done for the Stargate program, Joe McMoneagle and others. And I've gotten to know over the years a few of the other remote viewers, more prominent ones. I mentioned Angela Ford a little bit ago. So there's some really impressive results from a variety of remote viewing taskings that the Stargate program did. And one of the more interesting things, actually, which I had known about this question, I would have had the link ready. But there is a video on YouTube called Successful Remote Viewing. I think it might have said at the ASPR. This was a segment of a BBC program in which Keith Harari, one of my colleagues, who is a remote viewer or was a remote viewer, also did out-of-body stuff earlier in his life. He was asked to demonstrate remote viewing, and apparently what he did instead was he selected one of the production people, who was a production assistant, spent about 20 minutes with her explaining how remote viewing best works, and sat her down to do a remote viewing. And the segment actually shows what she's doing. It shows the follow-up. She nailed the location, not by name, but by specific things she drew and described. And part of the experiment was not only for her to draw stuff, but there were several locations chosen by someone not Keith in New York City. And Keith had to go to each one with the descriptions and try to match the one that she described. And it was very, very obvious which one it was. So I do recommend that. I'll see if I can actually find it while we're sitting here a little bit. But it's a really amazing YouTube video. And again, it was from I think it's from, I'm trying to remember, from a video called The Case for ESP, a BBC program called The Case for ESP. So something really, this is a very impressive one for a normal person to have done. And I suggest you take a look. I've also taught this in classes, in my developing intuition class. And over the years, I've had some students do really amazing things with this. Whether it was like real time or whether it was precognitive for that matter. In fact, I'll tell you a little quick story here. Years ago, oh, Lucas, okay, great. Found the clip, that's great. Years ago, I was a regular guest on a show called The Edge of Reality. It was a radio show out of New York City. It was done by, hosted by my late friend, he passed away last year, Lee Spiegel. And it was on WNBC radio. So it was a major show, major radio station, an AM radio station in New York. It was late Sunday night. It was like an 11 o'clock at night, Sunday night thing. And it was sponsored by Omni Magazine, for those of you who remember Omni. What was interesting was we did a few ESP experiments like live with people trying to figure out or try to remote view what was going on in the studio. But we did a remote viewing experiment precognitively where people were sent to try to view where Lloyd Auerbach was. It was going to be 2 weeks from, I think it was 2 weeks from the show that I was doing. They were to send a postcard, write it down in a letter, send it in to Lee at WNBC, and we were going to go through it after I went wherever I was going to go on the Saturday before the next show that I was doing. What was really interesting was I didn't know where I was going to be at all. It was totally random that I actually had a list of possible places to go, and I was going to randomize them. But last minute, that afternoon, that Saturday afternoon, a friend of mine called and said she was going to an art gallery opening in New York City. You want to come with me? It's like, sure. So got dressed up a little bit, went into Manhattan. From Westchester, we went to this art gallery. Now, when Lee and I went through the letters, we did it before the show, somebody had sent in a drawing, approximately, a rough drawing of me, which, the guy wasn't a great artist, and it's possible he knew what I looked like. But what he couldn't have known is the color of my jacket, sport jacket at the time, which was kind of a bright royal blue. That was a little unusual. And he had me standing in an art gallery in his picture. So he won the subscription to Omni. Unfortunately, we never really got a chance to follow up much more than that with him. So pretty interesting stuff. That I've seen some really amazing hits in viewing. And the other thing I'll mention about Stargate is if you're really interested in delving into the Stargate program, Of course, they did it. There was a huge data dump on the CIA website. A lot of it is redacted, unfortunately. But Ed May, who was the program director of the Stargate program, and his associate Sonali Morwaha put out 4 volumes of the data from the Stargate program, 4 hefty volumes. And they were able to remove, or Sonali was able to find duplicates of some of the reports where the redaction was different, so she could actually figure out what some of the things said. But there's some really great successes and a few failures in there as well from that program. We cover some of the highlights in the ESP Wars book as well. Susanna, thank you for sending those links. I haven't had a chance to watch watch them yet. I'm kind of busy the last couple of days, so I will watch them later tonight or tomorrow. So be kind of interesting to take a look. Of course, you know, the UAP stuff, it's of interest to me, but it's not my area at all, but I am somewhat interested. Okay. Carol, does ghost hunting, ghost gathering change the haunting location? That's a really good question. So the thing to know, of course, when we're dealing with investigations of reported ghosts, it could be a conscious entity where in that circumstance, interactions with human beings who are alive, like including a medium or a psychic, or the witnesses themselves, could very well change the ghost's mind. You know, it could change the ghost's behavior. It could change because it's a person. The apparition, the ghost, is a person, so it's up to them to change. We sometimes see that, sometimes we don't. With hauntings, residual hauntings, where it's an imprint or recording of past events, past people, that can change specifically because of new activity. A psychic I worked with at the American Society for Psychical Research years ago, one of his solutions for removing negative hauntings, meaning an imprint of some negative event or, you know, bad emotions, was to have a party and record over the past event, which does work. It's one of the ways to kind of play with it. And so one of the concerns that some of us now have, this was raised by John Sable, who's a name that might be familiar to some people who go to ghost conferences, but John raised the question that you're raising right now, which is a little more specifically, do the ghost hunters in their activity at these haunted locations, do they leave behind an imprint of them? In other words, are they recording over the ghost hunt, the imprint that was reported, so that now there's an altered bit? So down the road, some other ghost hunting team may actually experience an imprint of the previous ghost hunting team. Makes sense, especially when there's high emotion involved with that. So unfortunately, the more times people visit ghost hunting groups, and especially if they're yelling at the supposed ghost or doing all sorts of more emotionally charged stuff, the more likely that haunting is going to change. That is definitely something we have to consider. Susanna, there was a segment on psychokinesis between a remote viewer and a UAP, guiding it psychically. Was that psychokinesis, or is that telepathy between the person and who was operating the UAP? Unless it was a unmanned vehicle, I don't know that would be considered psychokinesis at all. It would be hard to prove that was PK versus telepathy, if that's what was going. If there was really someone of some kind in piloting the UAP. Also discussion of the investigation interviews of Congress. Yeah, there have been a lot going on. You know, it's not parapsychology unless the aliens, if there are aliens, or the entities, whoever's running those things, have some form of psychic ability. We really don't get involved in that stuff. And it's interesting. And certainly I was interested in a lot more in college when I was at Northwestern and volunteered at the Center for UFO Studies. But it's not something that kind of falls into my area. I find it interesting because of people I've known over the years who had experience in military intelligence, and they themselves were interested to find out what the rest of the military knew about UFOs or UAPs. and came to the conclusion that the government only knew that they were flying around and didn't want to tell anybody that they knew that because they also knew they couldn't do anything about it. And this is a typical military, even governmental idea or concept that if we can't do anything about it, it's better to pretend like we know something and let people think we're hiding something than to actually admit that we don't know something. So now we're at a point now where I think that's gone away. So people are now talking about it in Congress and other places that we've got to try to figure out what it is, what's actually going on. Okay. Unmanned. Susanna, how do you know it was unmanned? Watched a filming of the abandoned Bronx psychiatric building on YouTube. Guys are just filming any good stories of haunted abandoned I mean, there are plenty of mental institutions that the TV shows have gone to. They tend to like those quite a bit. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of emotion and like with a prison, there's going to be a lot of emotion and a lot of imprinting in that way. So people picking up stuff because it's really about the witnesses. The imprint's there, but it's kind of like, you know, you can have streaming running in the background, you know, that you could have your Amazon Prime device, Amazon Fire device, or Roku device actually streaming something, and maybe the TV itself is turned away from you, and until you turn the TV set or the monitor back towards you, you have no idea that there's anything there. So the thing is that witnesses, the people who experience the haunting, it is their psychic ability that is picking up the haunting. It's not, unless it's conscious and intending you to have an experience, it's not something intentional. We are just really just observers in that sense. Okay, egg shape retrieved by the government. Okay, yeah. Again, I can't comment on that because I haven't seen it. And then again, we have to make sure that that's actually real, because there's a lot of crap. Honestly, a lot of crap put out about this stuff too, or over there. Can ghosts read your mind? Not necessarily read your mind, but and I think that perhaps Kathy can talk about this. Mediums are having mental communication with apparitions, with spirit. That's all mental. They may perceive the communication visually, auditorily, or other ways, but it's still mental. That's telepathy. That's not mind reading, though. And, you know, when we think of mind reading, we think of images on TV and movies where someone actually probes your mind deeply. That's not what happens with telepathy. But picking up surface thoughts, picking up intentions, emotions, all of that, it's likely that apparitions can do that because that's their only way of, you know, their psychic abilities or psychic senses. They don't have physical senses. That's the only way to communicate, the only way to really pick up stuff from us who are living, or even to perceive the rest of the world, for that matter. So really, really tough to know, you know, if a ghost is deeply reading your mind. I'd worry about that, but I worry about that with anybody. Psychics don't do that. Living psychics can't do that. They can pick up stuff around you, kind of your information field, you might say, but nobody does a mind probe, for that matter. That's not happening. At least nobody that we know of at this point. Okay, so while we're kind of waiting for more at this point, because Susanna, I really can't comment on that unless I see it, and even then, again, I'm not in the whole UAP world enough to say, yeah, that's true or not. So I don't know what to say about that. So one of the question I got from this gentleman in Scotland was asking about sage, you know, smudging, burning sage. Can that really get rid of spirits or hauntings? Where did it come from? All that. So I think it's a common thing for people when they have what they think is bad energy to have someone come in and smudge the place with burning sage. And I've seen it over time. In fact, back when we had a graduate parapsychology program in Orinda, California at JFK University, when it was there, the building we were in was kind of a satellite building for the university. And we had the consciousness studies people, the holistic health people, transpersonal psychology were all housed in this one building. And at one point, somebody decided to smudge the whole place with sage. Um, Unbeknownst to them, it turned out we then found out that there was going to be a visitor from the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, and the smell, smells a lot like marijuana. We were all very concerned, so they had to read that person into it a bit. Um, that was a little dicey. Burning sage or smudging with smoke at all comes from Native American traditions. Not every tribe, and I'm not sure which of the specific tribes it comes from directly, but it was adopted by, there was a whole range of people who decided that they would become shamans and do all sorts of stuff in the 70s and beyond. And it was adopted by folks in rituals, shamanic rituals and other things, people who were not of that tradition in a slightly different ritual. But somebody who's trained in shamanism actually understands what's behind it, whereas most people don't. Most people doing smudging with sage don't understand. It's not the smell, it's not the sage, it's the intention behind it. And if you don't have a specific intention in mind, burning sage is not going to do anything other than leaving a smell behind for a while. So it really is about the intention. Smudging with sage doesn't really get rid of, if you've got a spiritor in your house, that's not one way to get rid of them, unless your intention pushes them out. As living people, we often have better psychic or stronger psychic abilities, even though they're unconscious, even though we can't control them, than the dead might in that sense. So that's one thing. And burning, the idea of having an intention of burning the sage or smudging because there's negative energy, that can cleanse a place, but it's not the sage that does that. It's the person who's doing the cleansing that's doing that. Just like psychics can come in without the sage and do the exact same thing. So it's not really about that at all. All right. Debbie, hi. Can a psychic locate lost, misplaced, stolen items? You're missing your jewelry. Yeah, I mean, some psychics can locate missing people, and there are some psychics who might be able to find specific items of jewelry. Part of it, if it's misplaced, meaning that you put it down somewhere or it was perhaps moved by somebody else. If you even don't remember where you put something down, that happens to all of us, let's face it. Maybe even where you dropped it, for that matter. Part of you recognizes or knows where that is. So, I mean, people have been hypnotized to find lost items, misplaced items. You can also try using a pendulum, because the pendulum reacts to your unconscious muscle impulses, and you can use that to ask questions and see if you can get anywhere in the house. And yes, some psychics can do that, but you need a psychic who's done that before, who has experience doing that, because not all psychics are equal. They don't all have the same ability or even applications of what they can do. Speaking a lot of crap, how would you recommend someone exploring heterodox fields such as psychic phenomena? Honestly, I have never even seen within experimental research of psychic phenomena the phrase heterodox fields. So I couldn't even tell you. All I can say is start reading into the literature within parapsychology itself for that. Theoretical stuff, you could, if you want, you could probably send a note to John Kruth at the Rhine Research Center. It's just john.kruth@rhine.org. He does energy work. He's going to be teaching the theories of psi course for the Rhine Education Center. He can possibly point you if there's been any literature that actually mentions that. I will tell you honestly, though, so many people have come up with so much crap, as you put it, about how psychic ability works, devices that supposedly gather psychic energy, or healing energy, or other things. There's a lot of crap out there, and they will sometimes use terms that come from physics without actually understanding what that term actually means. As an example, and I may have mentioned this in a previous show, one of the Whole Life Expos back in the 1980s, I spoke there, had a table. I was selling my first book, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, and I was wandering around, and there was a guy selling a device that used tachyon energy for healing, produced tachyon energy. And I, especially as a science fiction fan and a physics, having had some physics, I very, pleasantly said, "So, tachyon energy, can you explain that?" He says, "Well, this device gathers tachyons and produces an energy beam that can be used to speed up healing." I say, "Okay, do you know what a tachyon is?" And he looked blankly at me. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Do you know what a tachyon is?" And he was actually potentially working for, I think he was working for the guy who supposedly invented it. I said, "I think you need to go back and ask the designer if he knows what a tachyon is, or if you have something else that's going on in the device, because it's not possible for you to have tachyons in this device." So for those of you that don't know, a tachyon is a theoretical particle. You'll hear it in Star Trek and other places, but it's a theoretical particle whose lower limit of speed, of velocity, is the speed of light. In other words, it only travels faster than the speed of light. We have not been able to identify, except possibly mathematically, tachyons. It's a theoretical particle. We are in a world that is below the speed of light. We can't see those things, experience them, detect them for that matter. So I told him that, and he was not very happy with me. But that's the kind of marketing that goes on. Just like, honestly, my colleague Ed May, again, who ran the Stargate program for the last few years of its existence, he's trained as a nuclear physicist, actually, and still keeps himself in physics. And every time he hears the phrase "a quantum leap has been achieved," like somebody has, we have a quantum leap forward in business, we have a quantum leap forward in science, he always loves, with a big smile, to mention the fact that a quantum leap would be the smallest leap you could possibly make, because quantum refers to something that is subatomic, particles below the size of neutrons, protons, and electrons. It's a cool sounding term, but it doesn't have any real meaning for it. Let's see here. Carol, I offered a seance. It didn't work. There's anxiety in the group. Stop spirits attending. Maybe spirits just weren't around or didn't want to attend. It's not always the case that you can call somebody in. So, it just really depends. And it could have been fear or anxiety if there were spirits around. Liz, research shows burning sage also refers to smudging in a room for an hour, reduced airborne bacteria. Now, that's a really good thing. Has nothing to do with psychic anything, but that is a positive benefit of smudging. That's a really great thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. Do I have the name of someone? I don't know any. I know psychics who have done missing people. All I can say is, if you want to send me an email, I'll ask around. I'm putting my email it's pretty easy for this session. Just so I have your contact information, I'll see if I can ask around and if I can find any way. All right, Paranormal TV, hi there. Extremely interested in correlations between environmental factors and reports of haunting phenomena. Yeah, okay, so that's actually what we look at. All those devices out there, a lot of them we've been using in our field to look for correlations. And in fact, the reason to even use an EMF meter is because it has been noted, even before the more modern period, that there were higher than background, not always, but higher than background magnetic field readings in the locations or the spots where supposedly the haunting imprint was occurring, even when somebody was not perceiving it. One of the most important things, though, is whatever environmental sensors you do, you need to actually look at what's happening in the environment when someone is experiencing the haunting and when they are not. if the correlations, because actually I will add to that, in a few of the cases that I did where we had that correlation with a magnetic field and the haunting spot, the magnetic field increased when someone was experiencing the haunting. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the difference, not only looking for whether it's EMF, temperature, look at all the various things that are obvious: humidity, barometric pressure, uh, magnetic fields, electrical fields, static electricity. Those are all things you want to do. You want to consider also natural fields. So besides the fields that are picked up by a typical magnetometer, a Gauss meter, that picks up fields. Those are set to pick up fields generated by technology, by electronics, by electrical devices. They will not pick up natural fields. And there has been a correlation noted with geomagnetic fields, which are the fields produced by the Earth, very localized, and not only psychic ability, but also some of the phenomena that's out there. So if you can get your hands on a geomagnetometer or a natural tri-field, natural meter that's going to pick up the general field, even we give off electromagnetic fields, and a natural meter will actually be affected by us as well to some extent. So you want to kind of bring all that together. And the most important thing is, number one, two things. Connect the unusual sensor readings, so baseline and unusual, the not necessarily anomalies, but altered readings, with the actual event that's being experienced, its location and timing, and make sure you have more than one device that's picking something up. Now, it may only be one device and the human. That's still a correlation at that point. That's an important fact. I mean, those are all things that we look at. There are many devices. I would also try, there are different magnetic field sensors, different types of Gauss meters. Like, do not use a K2 meter. That's worthless when it comes right down to it, because there's so many other things it picks up. It's so sensitive. Make sure your equipment you buy is stuff that is created not for ghost hunters, but for people in industry and in science. So, for example, the Gauss meter I bought, the EMF meter I have, is designed for industry. And we were, myself, Mariah Kunal, who's a medium I work with, and another friend of mine were at the Whaley House late at night. We were alone except for a docent, and we got zero changes in the electromagnetic fields. In other words, magnetic field readings was nothing. EMF was nothing. It was pretty much, unless you got on top of the outlets, there was nothing. However, something in the neighborhood was generating a huge amount of RF modulation. So there probably were enough Wi-Fi routers, might have even been, I don't know that there was actually a cell tower nearby. I really didn't get a chance to look for that. And that would have generated a lot of RF. And that has nothing to do with it, as far as I know, with any activity at all. And we didn't really have much activity till later at night. And of course, there's a difference between looking for the haunting locations and correlating there and apparitional stuff. Because apparitions move around. If they exist, they move around and they have intention. So you have to kind of look differently at those two different types of phenomena as well. Okay. And Lucas, any thoughts on David Lynch? Great director. I've seen a number of things he's done. I have no other thoughts about him. Otherwise, I don't know that anybody's reported him communicating at all. Constant talk on the lower level of audio recordings, waves, raging fire crowds. Babbling brooks all have voices. I don't do much with EVP, with audio, because there's just too much potential for contamination. Let's put it that way. When I've done it, I've always used a plug of some kind. I don't have one right here, but when I use my, a digital recorder, I plug up the mic. I have two of them, and I will plug up the mic on one of them, because and I'll record on both of them, because once the mic is plugged, you're basically recording nothing, audio based, auditorily. digital recorders have a benefit over analog recorders in the sense that they, especially if they're flash drive based, they don't have moving parts, whereas like a cassette recorder or a reel-to-reel had moving parts, and there are many unfortunate EVPs during that era where the device was picking up the sound of its own motor, and that was a problem. But when you use two recorders and then take and try to synchronize the time code, or try to synchronize them as best you can, and then listen back to the one that was plugged up, if you get something on that, unless there's something wrong with the device, that says something. Whereas when you're using the one that's got a microphone on it, it depends on how sensitive the mic is, what else it might be picking up at a distance. Some sound, I mean, sound travels pretty far, and even the lower range could conceivably pick up some environmental sounds at a distance, kind of like step them down in that sense. I highly recommend that you read a book called Paracoustics. It's by Stephen Parson and Callum Cooper, and it's available on Amazon. They delve deeply into audio in this sense, and Parsons is, I think, one of the, if you ever any questions about any kind of equipment, Parsons is one of the people I would always point to. He is with the Society for Psychical Research. He is someone who has taken apart stuff. There's a skeptic named Kenny Biddle, who I'll be teaching a course with. In fact, we'll be talking about some of this stuff in our course starting at the beginning of February. I'll talk about that in a bit. But it helps to know what the device can do. It helps to know what its range is. It helps to know whether it's an audio recorder, a video recorder, an EMF meter, a REM pod, which is really just a theremin kit inside a housing, all of that. But that book, Paracoustics, is the one. The other one you might want to go to is Ghostology, also by Stephen Parsons, which kind of covers equipment in a really good way. There, if you put his name in, it's Stephen T. Parsons. If you put that into Amazon, oops, it's Parsons, sorry. Not Parson, Parsons. He also wrote 2 guides for the SPR. You can also find them on the SPR site, which there's a guidance notes for investigations, and there's a guidance note specifically about equipment. And if you go to the SPR site, he's also created these brochures that, what about got them here? I printed them out. So here's one on recording sound. Here's one on analyzing sound, measuring the temperature. So these are all derived from his other written work and downloadable for free. So I would download all his things, anything you can get to help you understand scientifically what we have to consider and how we have to work with equipment. And don't necessarily believe the claims of the people selling the devices, unless they're selling it for a different reason, like buying an EMF meter from, that's providing technical information to be used in industry or science. That's more important. Sadly, there are a lot of people taking advantage of ghost hunters out there, and devices cost quite a bit of money. So, for example, the REM pod, which I mentioned a moment ago, and people have heard me talking about this before, Kenny Biddle wrote a great article. It is on the Skeptical Inquirer on his blog. He takes things apart and looks at the innards. He got a hold of a REM pod, he took it apart, and really decided, number one, and I think this is really a good thing to point out, that the housing probably costs more than the innards, because the innards of the REM pod, what it's picking up, it's electromagnetism. It is basically a cheap theremin kit. Theremin is a musical instrument. It reacts to our electromagnetic fields. Normally, it's just a black box with an antenna, and you play it by moving your hand around the antenna. Actually, for the Whaley House investigation, Mariah had bought a kit, and we put it together in my hotel room before we went out to the Whaley House. And interestingly enough, towards the end of our being there that night, because we were there pretty late, she also had a couple of electrostatic detectors, and they started going off in sequence with the theremin. And just kind of a really interesting kind of wave that was happening. So that was interesting. Two completely different devices, again, picking up different things. Correlation right there. So, Paul, do you know when the TV show Ghost, the Australian version, is coming out? I know they're working on it. I haven't heard any more about when they're premiering it in Australia. No idea when we would get it, though. So I'm not really sure about that. Okay. Patrick, what's your opinion on the California Institute for Human Sciences Masters or PhD for Psychology? We focus on parapsychology. Well, the one thing I will say is that Jeffrey Mishlove, who is incredibly knowledgeable in our field and in consciousness studies and general consciousness research, he hosts his own show called New Thinking Aloud. Jeffrey's kind of overseeing that whole program. I don't know that it's going to be as in-depth as what, for example, we had at John F. Kennedy University for the master's program, because that was solely parapsychology with a few electives that were out just in related fields. And I don't know how much it compares as a PhD program to what the University of Edinburgh's Kessler unit produces. So that'd be something to look into. We're just starting to get information from Jeffrey in an e-group we have online. So, but the fact that Jeff is involved, I have full confidence that folks will come out of those programs knowing quite a bit about our field, for that matter. And it is that organization, that institute is in fact fully accredited by the Western Association of Schools and College. That's the official accreditation body that accredits schools like University of California and Stanford and other places. So definitely a good thing to look into if you're interested in further pursuing an academic education in the field. If you just want a sort of academic education in the field, or you just want to do some classes for fun, then I highly recommend the courses that we offer at the Rhine Education Center, which is starting its new session or new semester, starts the first week of February. And I will be teaching or co-teaching 3 courses. I'm co-teaching with skeptic Kenny Biddle a course called A Skeptical Approach to Parapsychology. And here we're going to be talking about true skepticism, which is really about asking questions. It's not about denying. It's not about denial. Those are not skeptics. Those are pseudo-skeptics or cynics or debunkers. Not the same. So it really is considering how to be a skeptic when you do investigations or in your research. I often call myself a situational skeptic, in that I firmly believe and have seen the evidence and laboratory work and in the field and the literature, which is over 100 years old, that makes me believe that psychic ability is real. I've certainly seen enough with mediumship to know that while not all mediums are real, there are some really good mediums out there. There are really good psychics out there. There are a lot of phonies out there too. So I'm not skeptical about the phenomena, about the abilities, about that. I am skeptical going into a case or even investigating a psychic, skeptical in the sense that let's wait and see. I need to gather enough information to determine what's really going on and exclude any normal explanations in cases for individual events, not just for the overall case, but for individual events, before I'll say, yes, this case has got some psychic or paranormal activity. So that's really important. Paul, thank you, Paul. I'm glad you enjoyed the survival course. That'll be in the spring. So skeptical approach is one of the courses I'm teaching, co-teaching that case. The other that I will be teaching is the first of 2 courses on field investigation, the parapsychological way, you might say. And there's quite a bit from the field itself, from my own experience and the experience of colleagues over the years, a little bit of history, because people have been investigating or doing ghost hunting since officially since 1882 with the SPR, but there have been people who've been investigating these cases even before that. And there are actually a couple of books on kind of pre-Victorian or Victorian ghost hunters. There is a book by Tim Prasil, Prasil, which looks at ghost hunters before the Victorian era, like going back to the 1700s. In fact, he found the use of the term ghost hunting in some literature in the late 1790s. And the very first case of ghost hunting on record was a guy named Artemidorus about 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece. So it's a long-term thing. So best practices, that's what my course goes over. Trying to make it practical and best practices, talking about the phenomena, all of that. And then I'll be teaching, both of those courses are starting the first full week of February. And then in March, I'm teaching a 4-week class. So the other 2 classes are 8 weeks. In March, I'll be teaching a 4-week class, which looks specifically at technology, sensors, all that stuff in investigations and how to assess them, the positives, the negatives, all of that is going to be looked at. Okay. The courses, so the courses we offer are really designed for anyone who just has either a cursory interest, so maybe you're just interested in the phenomena, interested in being a ghost hunter, interested in, depending on what the course is. Of course, the course we teach on survival of bodily death is anyone who's interested in the evidence for survival of bodily death. The courses are for people who are interested. If you have a deep interest and want to really progress, we have certificate programs. So people can take the courses for a grade. So there's discussion forums, there's sometimes quizzes, or you can just take them for fun and not participate at all. We like people to participate in the discussions anyway. There is a live lecture, which is recorded every week with a discussion during, after the end of the lecture. But at least half my students, because it's an online course, are not live. They will watch the recording the next day or a few days later. So it's really for people with an interest in the particular topic, if there's a course that strikes your fancy, or you can actually just really get a good education in parapsychology for that as well. All right. What are some of the most creative and compelling pieces of equipment you've seen? I'd have to think about that. The thing to know is that, as was asked before, we're really looking at the environment. There is no device that we know of that will guarantee or even consider detecting a ghost, detecting a haunting. We have to correlate to people's experiences. And when I see on these shows, for example, they ignore the witnesses, sometimes kick them out of the house. They don't even talk to them. And I've heard this from people who've called me after they've had local ghost hunters come in, that very often they don't even interview them about what's going on. They just want to know, so you think you have a ghost here? Let's check it out. Would you please go to a hotel down the road and we'll call you tomorrow morning with the evidence if we find anything. That's not an investigation. They're only using technology. There's no device that we can guarantee will be sensing or interacting with spirits other than human beings. There are no devices that we know can detect something we call a haunting other than human beings. The equipment is to support the human experience, not to supplant the human experience. Without human experiences, we don't know that any place has anything going on. So it's really important that people understand those kinds of things. So I can't say creative. People brought musical instruments. A theremin is kind of creative. A real theremin, and bringing an actual theremin in and playing with it, and hopes that if there is an apparition there, you can encourage them to play with it, to interact. You step back and see if they'll interact with it. I think that's creative, certainly. You also want some other devices sensing other environmental factors there. But honestly, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything that creative right off the bat. Brian Kano did take a class recently. I did enjoy having him, an ethics class. We had a course on ethics and investigations. I did enjoy his interactions with us as well. It was really good hearing his take because he's been out there doing he definitely is a smart guy. And yes, thank you, Paul. For those of you who really are interested in the evidence for life after death, the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies has been doing research in that area, especially in children who remember previous lives since the early 1960s. They have a huge amount of information on their website, lots of publications that are available for free, a lot of educational materials. That's the place to go. Okay, we only have a couple minutes. Desideratum, have you ever heard or encountered a being called a soul eater? Only in fiction. And really it is fiction. I've not, I have a background in anthropology and looking at cross-cultural at people's beliefs in the paranormal and kind of these kinds of things, and not run into a soul eater at all. Yeah. Although I think there is something like that, an entity that devours other spirits, not human, not connected to humans. I don't know if they're called it. They're definitely not called a soul eater in Japanese mythology and possibly Chinese mythology. So that kind of entity might exist. All right. And Carol, what do you think your life after death will look like? Well, first, I'm not going to go to the other side right away. I'm going to do my best to stick, and I may not have a choice, by the way. Not everybody seems to have a choice whether they can stick around or not. So I'm hoping I can stick around for a little while because I plan to explore, not only to travel the world, but to I'm a Star Trek fan and Star Wars fan. I'm planning on leaving the planet if I can and kind of seeing what's out there. I won't have to worry about breathing. So it'll be really interesting to see how far I can get. We'll see about that. And thank you, Paul, again for this. So I just want to kind of close here. Just remind everybody, if you go back through the chat, there's the Metaphysical Frontier Summit. You can just Google that and you'll get to the registration page, but I have the link. It's just metaphysicalfrontier.com. And this is a 10-day session, presentation of interviews and discussions with a number of people, myself included, in consciousness and parapsychology, in kind of related events, other areas. I think there might be some UFO people involved as well. Everything's recorded, so you'll be able to actually do it on demand for the day. There's different stuff every day. There's even more, and there's free things you'll be able to download. Everything is free for the Metaphysical Frontier Summit. So I do encourage you to log on. I will be in and out sometimes myself this week, but I'm looking forward to watching some of the presentations that others have done as well. And so that's one thing. And do check out the courses for the Rhine Education Center. And as always, since I now have a new website, it's lloydauerbach.com. Just spell my name right, you're fine. There's a lot there. There's a page of resources. There's an FAQ on ghosts and hauntings and things, and all of that. So yes, the Metaphysical Frontier Summit is free. So definitely register for it. All right. Yes, and please do hit the like button. Tell your friends about this. I'm trying to spread the word. Previous sessions, if you've missed them, are recorded under the live tab. You'll be able to watch older ones if you want. I don't always hit the same. I have some of the same questions sometimes, every other week it seems, but not all the time. I'm back in 2 weeks. So this is an every other week session through June. In June, we'll be skipping a week, and then it'll be every other week through the end of the year. So please come back. Please tell your friends. Have a great evening. Have a great couple of weeks till I see you again. Good night.